Ethan, a 10-year-old boy, surprised everyone by bidding for a sick, weak horse, drawing laughter from the crowd. But the desperate look in the horse's eyes made Ethan unable to stand still. The crowd thought he was wasting his time, but Ethan didn't care about the jeers. As the horse, Storm, stepped onto the auction platform, frail and trembling, could Ethan truly help the horse escape its tragic fate? Before continuing the story, tell me which city you're watching from. I want to know how far this video has come. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so I can send you exciting stories like this every day. The sharp crack of a whip sliced through the chaotic din of the auction grounds. Ethan flinched as the sound echoed, followed by the dull thud of a horse collapsing onto the wooden platform. The animal lay there, its flanks heaving, legs trembling like brittle sticks about to snap. A gruff man yanked at the halter, muttering curses under his breath. "Get up, you useless thing," he snarled, raising the whip again. Ethan's heart raced, his hands balling into fists at his sides. He had seen animals in poor shape before, but nothing like this. The horse's coat, once perhaps a proud gray, was now a dull, patchy mess, clinging to ribs that jutted out like broken planks on a sinking ship. Its eyes, though, those eyes held Ethan captive. They weren't lifeless like the rest of its body. No, they were deep, haunting, pleading. A strange knot twisted in his chest, an ache he couldn't quite explain. The crowd shifted uneasily. "That thing's a goner," someone muttered. Another snorted. "Better off glue than a pasture." Laughter rippled through the spectators, but Ethan barely heard them. The boy, barely 10 years old, stood rooted in place, his gaze locked with the horse's. It wasn't fear in those eyes, it was a quiet desperation, a flicker of hope hanging by a thread. Ethan's small fingers tightened around the crumpled bills in his pocket. He had saved every penny from odd chores and birthday gifts for this moment, dreaming of the perfect horse. Storm, as he would later call it, was far from perfect. But in that instant, Ethan felt an invisible pull, a connection stronger than reason. This horse needed him, and in some inexplicable way, he needed the horse. Next up, the auctioneer's voice boomed, drawing reluctant attention. One sorry excuse of a gelding, sickly and stubborn, but hey, maybe one of you fine folks has the magic touch. A weak chuckle followed, but no hands went up. Ethan swallowed hard, his mouth dry as sandpaper. He glanced around the crowd, searching for someone, anyone, who might give the horse a chance. The silence grew heavy, punctuated only by the animal's labored breaths. The auctioneer looked bored. "Well then, starting at $20, do I hear 20? Nothing. Ethan's hand shot up, surprising even himself. "I'll do it," he called, his voice cracking. The crowd erupted into laughter, and the auctioneer blinked, clearly startled. Well, we've got ourselves a bidder. $20 from the young man up front. Do I hear 25? Another long silence. Someone snickered. "What's the kid gonna do? Hug it back to life?" Ethan's cheeks burned, but he kept his gaze steady. He wouldn't back down. Not now, not with those eyes watching him. Sold. The auctioneer brought down his gavel with a decisive thud. To the brave young man for $20. He smirked, leaning over the podium. "Good luck, kid. You'll need it." Ethan ignored the jeers and stares as he climbed the steps to the platform. His heart pounded so hard he thought it might burst. The man with the whip tossed the lead rope toward him, muttering, "He's your problem now." Ethan stepped closer, swallowing his nerves. The horse flinched, its ears pinning back as if expecting another strike. Slowly, Ethan extended his hand, palm open, his voice soft but steady. "It's okay. I'm not gonna hurt you." The horse's nostrils flared, its muscles quivering. For a moment, Ethan thought it might bolt. But then, almost imperceptibly, it leaned forward, its nose brushing against his fingers. A tiny, fragile thread of trust had been spun. Ethan grinned, his breath hitching. "See? You're not so scary." He gave the rope a gentle tug, and the horse hesitated before stumbling to its feet. It swayed unsteadily, but Ethan stood firm, one small hand on its neck. "Come on, buddy. Let's get you home." As they left the platform, Ethan felt every eye on him. Some spectators whispered behind cupped hands. Others shook their heads in disbelief. His mother, standing near the edge of the crowd, looked equal parts horrified and baffled. "Ethan," she hissed, hurrying over. "What were you thinking? That poor thing won't last a week." Ethan met her gaze, his chin lifting stubbornly. "He's not poor. He's Storm," he said, surprising himself with the name. "And he's gonna be fine," she sighed, rubbing her temples. "We'll talk about this later." Storm stumbled again as they made their way toward the trailer Ethan's family had brought. Ethan stopped, giving the horse a moment to steady itself. He crouched beside it, brushing a hand gently over its bony flank. "You'll see," he murmured. "We'll fix you up. You're gonna be strong. Just wait." By the time they reached home, the sun had dipped below the horizon, casting the ranch in hues of gold and purple. Ethan led Storm toward the small paddock behind the barn, his mother watching from the porch with crossed arms. "It's not too late to give it back, you know," she called. Ethan shook his head. "He's staying." The paddock was little more than a patch of grass enclosed by a weathered fence, but it was enough. Ethan unlatched the gate and led Storm inside. The horse stood there motionless, its head drooping low. Ethan crouched by the fence, resting his chin on his folded arms. "You're gonna like it here, Storm," he whispered. "It's not much, but it's home." Storm's ear twitched at the sound of his voice, and for a moment Ethan could have sworn the horse sighed. The days that followed tested Ethan's resolve. Storm refused to touch his food, lay motionless for hours, and seemed to have surrendered entirely. Ethan, however, wasn't about to give up. Every spare moment was spent sitting near the paddock, either reading aloud or talking gently to the horse. One evening, as the sky turned a soft amber, Ethan spoke softly, almost as if sharing a secret. "You remind me of Dad," he said, his voice tinged with a mix of sadness and determination. He never gave up, no matter how tough things got. Ethan's determination only grew stronger. He began digging through every book he could find on caring for malnourished horses, determined to find a solution. With guidance from Mr. Harris, a kind neighbor with a lifetime of ranching experience, Ethan devised a plan. He prepared a special diet for Storm, mixing oats, carrots, and restorative herbs, following Harris's advice down to the letter. On the 5th day, a small but significant breakthrough occurred. As Ethan approached the paddock, holding a bucket of food, Storm shifted slightly, his gaunt frame trembling. The horse took a cautious step forward, nostrils flaring as he sniffed the contents of the bucket. Ethan froze, hardly daring to breathe, as Storm leaned in and nibbled tentatively at the food. "That's it, Storm. You can trust me," Ethan whispered, his voice trembling with hope. From that moment, something began to change. The fragile connection between boy and horse grew a little stronger each day. Ethan introduced simple routines to help Storm adjust, brushing his coat with slow, deliberate strokes and speaking in a soothing tone. Short walks around the property became part of their daily rhythm. Though the progress was gradual, Storm's strength began to return. His steps became steadier, and his coat slowly started to regain its shine. One late afternoon, as the sun cast long, golden shadows across the yard, Ethan decided it was time to take the next step. He retrieved an old saddle that had belonged to his father and brought it to the paddock. Standing beside Storm, he placed a reassuring hand on the horse's neck. "I'm not going to ride you just yet, buddy," he said softly, running his fingers through Storm's mane. "We're just getting you used to the idea." To Ethan's surprise, Storm didn't recoil or flinch as the saddle was carefully draped over his back. For the first time, a glimmer of real hope flickered in Ethan's chest. Perhaps this horse, once overlooked and dismissed, had the potential to be something extraordinary. Not everyone shared Ethan's optimism, though. At the local feed store, whispers and laughter filled the air whenever Ethan's name came up. "That boy's wasting his time," one man sneered as Ethan browsed for supplies. "That horse will never be anything more than a decoration out in some pasture." Ethan heard the words, his fists clenching at his sides, but he refused to let the taunts rattle him. The bond he was building with Storm meant more to him than anyone else's opinion. He didn't need anyone to tell him he'd made the right choice. Deep down, Ethan knew Storm was extraordinary, even if nobody else could see it. He was determined to prove it, no matter what challenges lay ahead. Weeks rolled into months, and Storm began to change in ways Ethan had hoped, but hardly dared to expect. The horse's once patchy, lackluster coat began to gleam under the golden rays of the sun. His movements, which had been slow and uncertain, grew smoother and more assured with every passing day. But it wasn't just Storm's outward transformation that struck Ethan. It was the connection between them, something deeper than words. Every morning before the first hint of sunlight broke over the horizon, Ethan would slip out of the house, a small bag of oats in one hand and a carrot in the other. As he approached the paddock, he'd call out softly, "Morning, buddy." Storm would lift his head, whinnying a greeting, his ears flicking forward at the sight of Ethan. The boy had learned to read the horse's subtle signals, a flick of the tail, the angle of his ears, the way he shifted his weight. Each gesture told a story, unspoken but deeply understood. One day, Ethan decided it was time to take their training to the next level. With the saddle strapped securely on Storm's back and a lead rope held lightly in his hand, he led the horse out of the paddock and toward the open field. The vast expanse of their ranch stretched out before them, the rolling grasses shimmering under the morning dew. Ethan paused, placing a steadying hand on Storm's neck. "All right, let's see what you can do," he murmured, giving the horse a gentle pat. At first, Storm moved cautiously, his steps deliberate, as though testing the ground beneath him. But then, as the crisp morning air swept through the field, something shifted. With a sudden burst of energy, Storm broke into a canter, his powerful legs churned the earth beneath him, dirt flying in his wake. Ethan stood still, awestruck, watching the raw beauty and strength of the horse he'd poured so much of himself into. Storm wasn't just running, he was reclaiming something that had been lost. It wasn't all smooth sailing. One afternoon, while Ethan was working with Storm on groundwork exercises, the horse abruptly reared, his nostrils flaring and his eyes wide with panic. Ethan's heart jumped as he tightened his grip on the lead rope. "Easy, boy, easy," he said, his voice steady but low. Storm's terror was almost tangible, his body taut like a coiled spring. It took nearly an hour of patient coaxing before the horse finally calmed. That night, Ethan sat beside the paddock, replaying the moment over and over in his mind. "What scared you, Storm?" he wondered aloud, his gaze fixed on the stars above. Then he remembered something his dad used to say. Horses don't just fear what's in front of them, they fear what's behind them too. The realization hit Ethan like a bolt of lightning. Whatever Storm had endured in the past still clung to him, like shadows he couldn't shake. Determined to help, Ethan decided to take a different approach. The next day, instead of pushing Storm through exercises, Ethan spent hours simply being near him. He sat quietly by the paddock or brushed Storm's coat with slow, deliberate strokes, speaking softly about anything and everything. He also began incorporating the gentle techniques his father had taught him, methods that prioritized trust and understanding over control. One evening, as the sky blushed with hues of orange and pink, Ethan decided it was time to try riding Storm for the first time. He approached the horse with the saddle in hand, his movements deliberate and calm. "This is it, buddy," he said, his voice even, one step at a time. To his amazement, Storm stood steady, allowing Ethan to mount. Ethan's heart pounded as he settled into the saddle, equal parts excitement and trepidation. "Let's take it slow," he whispered, nudging Storm gently. The horse moved forward, his steps sure and measured, and soon the two were moving together as if they were one. As they returned to the barn, Ethan noticed a figure leaning against the fence. It was Mr. Harris, their neighbor, and the man who'd offered Ethan advice when Storm was at his weakest. The older man tipped his hat, a rare smile softening his weathered face. "You've done something special here, Ethan," he said. "That horse, he ain't just better. He's alive again. And so are you." Ethan felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Thanks, Mr. Harris," he said quietly, leading Storm back to the paddock. As he watched the horse settle in, Ethan realized their journey together was far from over. Storm's transformation wasn't just about strength or speed, it was about trust, resilience, and the bond they had built. But just when everything seemed to be falling into place, a curveball arrived. On a bright Saturday morning, the rumble of an engine broke the peaceful silence of the ranch. A shiny black truck rolled up, and a group of strangers stepped out, their polished boots gleaming in the sun. The man at the front, tall and sharp-eyed, introduced himself as Mr. Callum. "We've heard about your horse," he said, his gaze fixed on Storm as the horse grazed peacefully in the paddock. "He's incredible, and we'd like to offer you a chance to showcase him at the county's annual equestrian fair." Ethan's breath caught. The county fair was no small event. It was the pinnacle of equestrian competition. Before he could respond, his mother stepped forward, her tone firm. "We appreciate the offer, but Storm isn't a show horse. He's part of this family now." Mr. Callum's grin stretched across his face, but there was a noticeable edge to his voice. "What a pity," he said, his words laced with feigned regret. "A horse like that deserves to be seen. But if you change your mind, you know where to find us." With those parting words, he and his associates climbed into their truck and drove off, leaving behind a tension that seemed to linger in the air long after they were gone. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Over the next few days, he began noticing peculiar things. Deep tire tracks in the dirt near the edge of the ranch, ones that didn't match any vehicles they owned. At night, Storm seemed unusually restless, pacing his paddock as if sensing something Ethan couldn't see. Then late one evening, disaster struck. Ethan bolted upright in bed, startled by frantic whinnies cutting through the quiet of the night. The acrid smell of smoke hit his nose moments later. His heart dropped. Throwing off his blanket, he raced outside to find the paddock engulfed in flames. Bright orange tongues licking up the wooden posts and sending plumes of black smoke spiraling into the sky. "Storm!" Ethan shouted, his voice cracking as he spotted the horse trapped inside. Storm reared in terror, his powerful legs kicking at the gate that wouldn't budge. Ethan didn't think twice. Grabbing a soaked blanket from the laundry line, he ignored his mother's desperate shouts from the porch, begging him to stop. The heat was suffocating, but he pressed forward, his focus unyielding. "Easy, boy, I'm here," Ethan yelled, his voice steady despite the chaos. Storm's wild eyes darted toward him, and for a fleeting moment, the horse stilled. Ethan seized the chance, throwing the wet blanket over Storm's back. Moving quickly, he unlatched the gate and led the horse out to safety, away from the collapsing paddock. By the time the fire was extinguished, the paddock was little more than a charred skeleton. Exhausted and shaking, Ethan collapsed onto the ground, coughing as Storm gently nudged him with his muzzle. It was then that something caught his eye, glinting faintly in the ashes. Crawling closer, he reached out and picked up a silver lighter, its surface scratched but unmistakable. His stomach turned. "This wasn't an accident," he whispered, his hands trembling around the lighter. The following morning, the sheriff arrived to investigate. Ethan explained what had happened, showing him the lighter, but there wasn't much to go on. Without clear evidence, there was little the authorities could do. Ethan couldn't shake his suspicions of Mr. Callum and his men, but for now he kept his thoughts to himself. Determined to protect Storm, Ethan poured his energy into fortifying the ranch. With Mr. Harris's help, he rebuilt the paddock using stronger materials, installed motion-sensitive lights, and even set up a camera to keep watch at night. Yet no matter how hard he tried to reassure himself, a lingering sense of unease clung to him. Despite the fear, Ethan refused to let it overshadow the bond he had with Storm. Their connection only deepened after the fire. Storm, once cautious and hesitant, began responding to Ethan's every cue with a precision that felt almost uncanny. The horse seemed to understand him in ways Ethan couldn't explain, executing maneuvers with a grace that left even Ethan's skeptical mother stunned. One warm evening, as Ethan led Storm through a series of practiced movements in the newly rebuilt paddock, Mr. Harris leaned against the fence, watching with a small smile. "That horse of yours," he said, his voice filled with admiration, "isn't just special. He's something extraordinary." Ethan paused, running a hand along Storm's neck. "Thanks, Mr. Harris," he said quietly. The older man nodded, his expression serious. "And so are you, Ethan. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Ethan felt a warmth rise in his chest. Storm's transformation wasn't just about proving his worth to others. It was about proving something to himself. But the fire wasn't the end of their challenges. Months passed, and life on the ranch began to settle into a rhythm again. Storm thrived under Ethan's care, his coat gleaming like polished silver under the summer sun. Word of their bond began to spread, drawing curious visitors eager to see the boy and his remarkable horse. One afternoon, as Ethan guided Storm through a routine, the familiar rumble of a black truck approaching the ranch caught his attention. He froze, his hand tightening around the lead rope. Mr. Callum stepped out, his polished demeanor replaced by something more hurried, almost desperate. "We have a proposition," Callum began, his tone attempting to sound friendly, but carrying an unmistakable urgency. "The regional horse competition is coming up in 2 weeks. Storm could be the star of the show. We'll cover all the costs, sponsor you. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity." Ethan's mother, standing nearby, crossed her arms. "And what's in it for you?" she asked, her voice cool and cautious. Callum hesitated, then admitted, "Our organization's reputation has taken a hit recently. A win with Storm would help restore it." Ethan looked at Storm, standing tall and proud beside him. He could see through Callum's motives. They weren't about admiration for the horse, but about salvaging his own standing. Still, Ethan also saw the chance to prove what Storm could do, not for Callum, but for everyone who had doubted them. "We'll do it," Ethan said firmly, surprising everyone, even his mother. The next 2 weeks were grueling. Ethan and Storm trained tirelessly, perfecting each step, jump, and maneuver until they moved as one. On the day of the competition, the stadium buzzed with excitement. But when Ethan and Storm entered the arena, the crowd fell silent. The announcer's voice rang out, carrying a note of admiration. "And now a local boy and his once-forgotten horse, ready to show us the meaning of perseverance." Ethan placed a reassuring hand on Storm's neck. "Let's show them who we are," he whispered. As the duo began their performance, Storm moved with a grace and power that captivated the audience, proving with every flawless leap and turn that even the most overlooked could rise to greatness. The crowd erupted with thunderous applause as Ethan and Storm executed their final move, a daring, perfectly timed leap over the tallest obstacle on the course. The moment their hooves touched the ground, the roar of the audience grew even louder, shaking the stadium with its energy. While the judges worked to calculate the scores, Callum, who had once been so smug and dismissive, made his way toward Ethan. The arrogance that had defined him earlier was gone, replaced by a quiet sincerity. "You've got something real special, kid," he admitted, tipping his hat slightly. "I shouldn't have doubted you." When the results were announced, the cheers seemed to grow impossibly louder. Ethan and Storm hadn't just won their category, they had captured the hearts of everyone who witnessed their journey. The trophy, gleaming and grand, was handed to Ethan, but it wasn't the shiny prize that meant the most to him. Later that evening, back at the ranch, Ethan sat by the paddock, the distant hum of crickets filling the air. He watched Storm grazing under the fading light, his coat shimmering faintly in the sunset's glow. Ethan's thoughts wandered over the path that had brought them here. Storm wasn't just a horse. To Ethan, he was the embodiment of resilience, a testament to trust, and proof that even those overlooked and underestimated could rise to greatness with love and persistence. The morning sun spilled across the fields of Ethan's ranch, casting golden hues over the paddocks and barn. Storm stood tall near the fence, his coat gleaming as if he knew he had become something extraordinary. Across the yard, Ethan watched him from the porch, a steaming mug of coffee warming his hands. It was hard to believe how far they'd come. From that chaotic day at the auction to now, their story had become something neither of them could have imagined. It started small. A local journalist had heard about their win at the county fair and written an article titled "The Boy and the Broken Horse, A Tale of Second Chances." Within days, the piece went viral. First, people in neighboring towns came by to see them. Then, larger publications picked up the story. By the time a camera crew from a national news network rolled into town, Ethan and Storm had become household names. The ranch soon buzzed with activity. Visitors arrived daily, some with cameras, others with notebooks, all eager to document the bond between Ethan and Storm. Reporters often asked the same question: "What made you choose him that day?" Ethan's answer never wavered. "I didn't choose Storm," he'd say with a small smile. "He chose me." Despite the whirlwind of attention, Ethan refused to let it change who they were. He kept their routine simple: early mornings, quiet rides, and time spent tending to the ranch. The fame was flattering, but for Ethan, the real reward was seeing how their story inspired others. Letters poured in, handwritten notes from children, emails from horse trainers, even a message from an old rancher who said Storm reminded him of a horse he'd loved as a boy. Each letter carried the same sentiment, hope. As the months turned into years, the ranch evolved. What had once been a quiet family farm became a sanctuary for animals and a learning center for people. Ethan called it Storm's Haven. He and his mother built additional paddocks, opened a small visitor center, and invited experts to hold workshops on animal care and rehabilitation. Children from nearby towns came for field trips, wide-eyed as Ethan shared Storm's journey. One summer, they held an open house complete with hay rides, demonstrations, and a chance for kids to meet Storm up close. The line to see him stretched halfway across the property. Ethan watched as a shy boy approached Storm, hesitating at first but eventually reaching out to stroke the horse's neck. Storm stood perfectly still, his gentle eyes locking onto the boy's. The sight made Ethan's chest tighten. That moment, he realized, was what all the hard work had been for. Still, the attention wasn't always easy. Not everyone understood the bond Ethan and Storm shared, and some critics dismissed their story as sentimental nonsense. Just a lucky horse with a good trainer, one article had said. Ethan ignored the negativity, choosing instead to focus on the good they were doing. For every skeptic, there were 100 others who believed. And then there were the challenges. Storm wasn't young anymore, and his health required careful monitoring. Ethan spent countless nights by his side, especially during the colder months, when the aches in Storm's legs flared up. Each time Ethan thought about that first day, how fragile Storm had seemed, and how far they'd come together. No matter how tired he was, Ethan never left Storm's side when he needed him. One crisp autumn evening, Ethan stood by the paddock, watching Storm graze as the sun dipped low on the horizon. The media buzz had quieted down over the years, though their story still appeared in magazines and documentaries from time to time. These days, life felt peaceful again, just the way Ethan liked it. He leaned on the fence, his hands rough from years of ranch work, but steady as ever. "You know, buddy," he said softly, "if someone told me back then we'd end up here, I'd have laughed him off the ranch." Storm flicked his tail, his ears twitching at Ethan's voice. Ethan chuckled. "But I'm glad we didn't listen to him. Look at all we've done." As the sky shifted from gold to deep amber, Ethan let himself reflect. Storm wasn't just a horse. He was proof that broken things could be mended, that love and patience could rewrite the ending of any story. Together they had faced fire, both literal and figurative, and come out stronger. Ethan felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude, not just for Storm, but for everything their journey had taught him. Behind him, the farmhouse door creaked open, and his mother stepped out, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders. "Sunset's beautiful tonight," she said, joining him at the fence. "Yeah," Ethan replied, his voice quiet. "It is." They stood there together, watching as the last light of day bathed the ranch in warm, fading colors. Storm lifted his head, his silhouette strong against the horizon. To Ethan, it was more than just a sunset. It was the closing of a chapter, a reminder of every challenge they'd overcome. In that moment, Ethan felt something shift within him. It wasn't sadness or even nostalgia. It was peace. He glanced at his mother, then back at Storm, a soft smile playing on his lips. He knew their story would live on, not just in headlines or letters, but in the hearts of everyone they'd touched. As the final rays of light disappeared and the stars began to blink into view, Ethan placed a hand on the fence and said quietly, "You did good, Storm. Real good." And in his heart, he knew his father would have been proud. Wow, what a journey Ethan and Storm took us on. Although this story isn't based on real events, it's packed with lessons that feel so personal and real. At its core, it's about resilience, compassion, and believing in second chances, not just for others, but for yourself. Think about it. Storm, once discarded and overlooked, becomes a symbol of hope, all because one boy saw value where no one else did. That connection between them, so fragile at first, grows into an unbreakable bond, proving that with patience and love, even the most broken can heal. To the end, the story of Ethan and Storm powerfully proves that love and persistence can overcome any obstacle. A 10-year-old boy, with all his sincerity and determination, did what no one thought possible. He saved a horse that seemed beyond help. Ethan's journey is not just a story about the revival of a creature, but also a testament to the strength of the human heart when we dare to believe in the impossible. Ethan not only changed Storm's life, but he also taught us lessons about patience, determination, and unconditional love. These are values that never grow old and always have the power to change the world. If this story moved you, don't forget to hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel so you won't miss any inspiring and meaningful videos like this one. Be sure to turn on notifications to catch all the wonderful stories to come. Thank you for watching, and we look forward to seeing you in our future videos.